So thank you for joining us today. We're thrilled to be able to welcome you to Responsible Disruption and the new season of our Innovation Table Zoomcasts. My name is James Gamage and I'm the Director of Innovation and the Social Impact Lab at the United Way of Calgary and area.
And my name is Monique Blau and I'm the Director of Strategy and Design in the lab at J5, which is a Calgary-based innovation and design firm. And we are your hosts of Responsible Disruption. We're excited to welcome our guests as we explore this important conversation, which is building human connections in a virtual world. I would like to acknowledge that we're currently gathered on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. The traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohintis, which we now call the city of Calgary. This is traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as Treaty 7 territory, which includes Kainai, Siksika, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda nations. We would also like to recognize the Métis people and the Inuit people who have made their home here in Calgary. Next, we have a few housekeeping items to cover and our agenda for the day. We are recording this session, so if you'd like to share it with your colleagues or friends, we will email you a follow-up link in the next couple of days. This session is also being recorded and will be hosted on our YouTube channel. And of course, we have another Responsible Disruption episode coming next week at 2 p.m., which is Equity in the Food System. For our agenda today, we'll do some introductions. We're looking to have a lively conversations with our guests and opening up for audience questions as well. If you'd like to ask questions along the way, you can do so by clicking on the QA button, which is at the bottom of your Zoom panel. And we'll be collecting these questions throughout our Zoomcast today, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can.
Come off mute. So the Social Impact Lab is a collaboration between J5 and the United Way of Calgary and area, and is our response to the disruption that we are seeing in the social sector. At the lab, we invest in innovation, which we're calling responsible disruption, ensuring that any change that results is considered and fair to Calgarians and communities. Our responsible disruption Zoomcasts are a series of discussions with leading players about disruption in their fields. So what are we going to discuss today? So we're now 8 months into lockdown and the roller coaster continues. We all know that lockdown is affecting people's mental health, as from January until September, there was a 77% increase in calls to the distress centre. So much has changed, not least the way that we build relationships with our networks of friends, co-workers, customers, prospects, suppliers, followers. Each of us now has an intimate relationship with Zoom, and we're all learning how to connect with others through a screen. Today, we're speaking to 3 experts on human connection. Each have experienced the changes brought by lockdown in their personal and professional lives, and each will bring their own perspective to the challenges and opportunities afforded by connection through digital media in the virtual world. So who are our guests? Firstly, we have Mike Morrison. Mike is one of Canada's most successful content creators. Since 2006, Mike has brought millions of Canadians together through a variety of projects, including his highly successful blog, a best-selling guide for cyclists called Calgary by Bike, a podcast for budding entrepreneurs called I Quit, and a series of popular digital marketing conferences called Social West, Social Central, and Social East. In 2020, after having to cancel all live in-person events, Mike successfully pivoted his 3 conferences into a series of online events called Social at Home, featuring hundreds of attendees from 10 provinces and 1 territory. The events were highly rated, with 92% saying they would attend future online events. Jackie Mattock Howard has worked at United Way in various capacities since 1992, including Vice President of Resource Development, Principal Gifts, and more recently, Innovation and Enterprise. Jackie's key responsibilities include United Way's virtual reality experience, Project Empathy, Ripple Impact, which is a social enterprise, and United Way's customer experience work. She never expected to spend most of her career with one organisation, but United Way at its essence is about people, relationships, and working together to build a better community. That human connection is what keeps her energized and motivated. Jackie feels very fortunate to have worked with remarkable business leaders in our community, as well as an amazing staff team at United Way, and believes that diversity of thought and creativity has driven the innovation and evolution of United Way in Calgary and area. Finally, we have Kelsey Hahn. Kelsey is the co-founder and CEO of Monark, an early-stage technology startup delivering on-demand digital leadership growth, where AI-powered goal setting, assessment, and real-time nudges and experiential learning combine in a simple app to combat the global leadership void. Prior to Monark, Kelsey spent over 7 years in a single family office as managing director of research at Viewpoint Group, overseeing the birth, growth, and strategic direction of the centre, and a team of researchers dedicated to evolving society's knowledge about business leadership. Kelsey oversaw all centre activities, including research and facilitation, leadership assessment, and supporting the founder in public advocacy. Kelsey continues to act as a strategic resource and trusted advisor for various companies in oil and gas, private equity and investment, and regularly speaks on organizational behavior and leadership. Kelsey holds an MSc in management from Queen's University and keeps busy chasing after her spirited 3-year-old daughter. Welcome to you all.
Thanks, James, and welcome to our guests. Just a reminder for our audience, we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So please use the chat function if you've got comments, and remember to use the Q&A for any questions that we can put to our panel. So I'm excited to kick this off. We've all been caught short by this lockdown, and there are so many stories about how adversity has brought out amazing flexibility and adaptability of people. And as James introduced you, Mike, and talked about your skills as a connector and what you've been able to do, as a community builder, you've really had to pivot fast from these in-person conferences to online events earlier this year. And we'd love it if you could share with us how people took to this change.
Yeah, I think for me, thank you very much, everyone. Hi, everyone. For me, it was, as with all small businesses, it was so personal and it was so gutting when we had to start canceling our conferences. We had sold upwards of 600 tickets to events across the country. And it wasn't as simple as cancel and refund. We spent so much of that money marketing the event, so much of that money spent before the actual event. And so to refund everyone would just be financially devastating. But not only that, basically losing everything I built 5 years, building across the country, and then it was just gone in a day. And not for anything I did wrong. That was the hardest part, I think, for me, was in a lot of small businesses. We all make mistakes and we're like, okay, good lesson. Let's not do that again. But there was no lesson with this. There was nothing we did wrong. It just happened to all of us at once. And so part of my thought was, though, is I couldn't wait too long, because the longer I waited, the more people would start asking for refunds and start, losing faith in what we had built and things like that. And so almost immediately, like the second week of the pandemic, we started doing these free webinars. And I was just saying, like, okay, because back then, March, we're like, maybe we could do it in June, maybe we could do it in July. We'd postponed some of them to October. And so we're like, let us just come up with a solution. And so then eventually we came up with doing Social at Home, the online conference, and having never done webinars before, anything like that. Like my first webinar I ever did was Social at Home, like the first week, and it was about social media in a crisis. And we had 800 people show up online, and I'd never been to a webinar, done a webinar, anything. And it was terrifying. But really the events and the conferences and things like that, we send everyone a box, Social at Home, and you open the box and you participate throughout the day with the speakers, and you open envelopes, and there's all these engagement things. And so sort of going back to when we were building, I was thinking about the loneliness of what we're all going through and sitting at home and all things like that. But also as a business, having to provide something that enough value that I could continue to put a roof over my head, as opposed to just continuing free webinars all the time. So it was definitely like looking back, I can't believe it all happened. Like it feels like a dream kind of thing. But we just announced Social at Home, the third one today. Tickets went on sale this morning, and we sold like 30 tickets already for an event in March. So like we're chugging along, and I'm okay with this new reality for right now. So it's pretty exciting.
Thanks for sharing that, and congratulations on being able to pivot so quickly. I'm curious if you could share on some of the benefits that you may have heard from your customers on having experienced, what you had in the past and then pivoting to this online. Yeah, what did your customers have to say about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like we have a 93% approval rating or something like that. And that blew me away. When we first did our first online conference, the sponsors were like, well, how many people are going to watch throughout the day? Because we had sold about 500 tickets. And they were the people whose event we had canceled for the most part. And I was like, I don't know, maybe 100, 150. And we never dipped below 400 people through like a 9-hour long conference. It never went below that. And it sort of has opened my eyes up a lot. Like, honestly, when the world sort of returns back to normal, whatever that looks like, I'm going to keep both elements, because the online element works for so many different types of people. Not to mention, like, I purposely do my events in cities that I feel like are underserved for marketing conferences. So Calgary, Ottawa, and Halifax. And so now with an online conference, we can have people from Nunavut attend. We can have people from Newfoundland attend. We can have people whose companies wouldn't pay for them to fly to a conference and hotels and things like that. And so my goal with my conference has always been to provide, world-class digital marketing knowledge to whoever needs it and wants it. And now with online, I can do that. I can also get, speakers that I maybe wouldn't be able to afford before. Speaker fees are crazy high, and for the most part, they've lowered them because the ask is smaller. It's a 30-minute in-home presentation now kind of thing. And so I will say my business is at the end of 2020 is at a better place than we were at the beginning of 2020. And I never would have, having to cancel so much, I never would have thought that was possible.
Thanks for that. You've really touched on some of the benefits of creating these virtual experiences. And I think this leads really into a good spot for you, Kelsey, because, Mike, you're talking about, people attending, and it's really about a business showing leadership in times of change. And I think that's a perfect spot, Kelsey, to bring you in. When we think about leaders, how do you think the discipline of leadership has changed when we think about this new virtual world that we're in?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for being here and being part of this timely discussion. We've learned a lot over the past 8 months about leadership, and I think we're still learning a lot. Just recently, the Journal of Applied Psych, I think, released some research just this week around the differences between men and women in leadership in crisis, and how a lot of the early evidence, at least coming out of the US, is that women as leaders fared better during this crisis and during this pandemic. And specifically not because they're women, but because they tend to be more empathetic, and they tend to be to take on more of a component of transformational leadership called individualized consideration, which is really just all about meeting people and followers where they're at, and really attuning your leadership skills to where those people are at. So personally, I've seen the whole spectrum. You see people really stepping up in terms of their leadership capabilities, and people feeling, I think, crushed and kind of overburdened by it all and stepping back, and possibly just being paralyzed in what to do. And so there's a lot of interesting observations I think we can take away, but certainly one of the big ones is over communicating. I think the leaders that have really stepped up have excelled in over communicating with their staff. I don't think that there's such a thing as over communication during times of crisis. No one on your team is ever going to say my leader was checking in with me too much, to an extent. But I think that has been really important for people to know that your leader is still, it's top of mind for them, your well-being. So.
I'm curious if you could share a bit about about Monark, because I know that Monark has a digital learning solution, and curious as to how it might be helping leaders as well during this time. Yeah,
so Monark was actually born out of the pandemic. And so similar to Mike, if you would have asked me in March that this is where I'd be in November, I would have said you were crazy. But my partner and I, my co-founder Amanda, we really started to look at the work we were doing, look at the way that our leaders and the teams we were working with were responding to the crisis, and either utilizing more services in terms of leadership support or stepping back. But the number one thing that we realized is that most leadership solutions and interventions that are out there are not digital. And so it was really hard for leaders to want to engage in development, either for themselves or with their team, that wasn't like a hands-on type session, which is what we normally see. And so really our Monark is, we're building our product right now. We are about to head into development, but it is about building on-demand leadership services for all kinds of leaders. And so making it very accessible and affordable to entire organizations, because I think that's the other thing that we really see with leadership in crisis is that it is a great time for leadership emergence. Mm-hmm. And we want to empower people in organizations who definitely, even in the good times wouldn't have access to, more elitist or expensive leadership offerings from their company. This is a way for those people to still be working on meaningful behavioral change without the price tag.
I see a theme here around accessibility in this virtual space. I also really like, Kelsey, how you brought, that empathy is playing a real role in this. And I liked the individualized consideration that women might be bringing, which is a differentiator. And I think empathy is a great place to bring you, Jackie, into this conversation because, the work that you're doing with the Social Impact Lab around building empathy through technology. Could you share with us what you're doing there?
So our journey started before COVID, which is interesting how all this happened. But we started to work 2 years ago with some companies talking about how we might engage employees more deeply in issues in our community and share the experience of some of those issues. And so the solution we landed on was we wanted to build empathy. That's what we wanted to do. And the way we wanted to do it was to use virtual reality to do that. And 2 years ago, when we started to talk about this project, it was significantly expensive. And as with everything else, technology has made it much more affordable. So we were this year able to, in the midst of COVID, produce an experience about a 10-year-old boy named Jack who lives with his family in poverty. And we chose to do a digital experience because it was more cost effective, read cheap from a not-for-profit perspective, and we wanted to make it interactive so that people weren't just sitting watching a video, they were actually immersed in the experience. And so we partnered with a local or a number of firms who have local branches here. One is Finger Foods, who have since been bought out by Unity, and they've been a great partner in the digital design of the experience. Ear Candy, who helped us with voice actors. Daniel O'Shea, who was our script writer, and J5, of course, that helped us build the whole customer experience. And so people come into the lab space. So interestingly enough, it's a virtual experience, but we have you actually, if you're comfortable, come to us and have the experience. And partly why we do that is it's not just the experience, it's the post-conversation experience and what people saw and felt that's really important. And we've had about 60 people through the experience right now. We are measuring, does it increase people's feelings of empathy via survey and via interviews, but we can say that we know we've had people become very emotional after going through the experience, and people talk about what resonated for them within the experience. And so it's been a fascinating tool. And as we continue to test, we'll look at ways that we can actually do it all virtually. Can we send the headset out and do something different virtually? But we're feeling pretty good that it will drive empathy. And why do we want to drive empathy? We want to drive action. We want to change our community, and we want people to volunteer. We want them to sign petitions. We want them to donate, to make change in our community. So we'll be measuring all of that.
Yeah, that's great. I am curious. I'm just going to go to you, Mike. Talking about empathy and the importance it plays in these human connections. When you're thinking about hosting a conference at scale like you do, how do you see that playing out between your speakers and your guests? And I'm wondering if you can share some of that with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like social at home, the conferences, and basically everything I do, it's so different than sort of the typical conferences you might be used to, because most conferences are put on by companies who have something to sell you, where I don't have that. My thing to sell you is the ticket. So if you've bought a ticket, sort of my commercial obligations to you is finished, and now I have to provide you an event that I think you hope is worth the money you paid for, kind of thing. And so all of my events, we pay every single one of our 40 speakers. We work with the Calgary Foundation to reduce prices for nonprofits. We work with for our in-person events, we worked with Universal Access in Calgary to make sure our venues were as accessible as possible. So I think that sort of thinking about all the different moving pieces is something that's just sort of ingrained in my business and ingrained in what I do. And so I like to try to think to have as many access points. So I try to think of why people might say no to coming to something that I'm offering, and then try to offer a solution to those problems.
Awesome. And Kelsey, as a leader in your organization, is empathy at the forefront of your mind when you're meeting with your team or in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so in March, I pivoted to having weekly team meetings, which I know a lot of teams already do, but for us, we worked in a really small office. And so we would have regular contact all day long. And we actually didn't have a lot of formalized meetings. So what we did is we immediately pivoted to regular team meetings, as well as I had one-on-ones with everyone on my team. So like already it was like 6+ hours a week of just being in meetings. So definitely Zoom fatigue was real, but I found that time was really important for myself and my team just to check in on things. Even if we had nothing to talk about that day, work-wise, it was like, how are you doing mentally? How are you doing personally? Which I feel was just a really good outlet for people.
Yeah. It's, what comes to mind for me is for those people that don't have access to teams or colleagues to connect with every day, and that might be experiencing social isolation. And, there's a great deal of people that may not have those same experiences or advantages. And so maybe I'll put this to you, Jackie, but how important do you think connection is in the young people? I know in the work that you're doing in poverty with the United Way, you're looking at some of that, and maybe you could also to speak to how the technology might be used to support this.
Well, we know that technology is incredibly important. And when the pandemic started, we had a number of firms donate laptops so that kids could continue learning online while with their classrooms shut down. And that's certainly part of the puzzle. I mean, speaking with friends who teach in communities that have higher needs than others, it's not just the technology, it's also the support to make the technology work. A girlfriend of mine's a teacher, and she's always asked IT related questions, and it's not her area of expertise. So I think there's technology, there's support for that technology, and then there is, how do we build people's capacities to use technology effectively? Whether it's a Zoom call, and do you do check-ins at the beginning of a Zoom call to just make that human connection? Do people have their videos on so you can have eye contact and make those connections? And how do we listen really well and listen empathetically and really put ourselves in the position of the person we're talking about? I think now more than ever, whether it's young people, in high needs neighborhoods, or any of us working, you have to work extra hard digitally to make that human connection for people and make it authentic.
Yeah, I would agree. I think some of the things that Oh, Kelsey, you had something to say.
I was just going to jump in on that. You know, one thing I've been really thinking about and concerned as the pandemic weighs on all of us is the over reliance on social media and technology and our devices the longer this continues. And so, you know, Monique, yes, we're isolated, but I think we also need to try to push ourselves in finding ways to connect without technology. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's like, you know, can you find ways to send people a quick text and, you know, let them know that you're thinking about them and that you're on their mind, but not maybe engaging in a 2-hour Zoom call? Because I think for me personally, that really started to impact me. I was like, I can't Zoom anymore. And so I'd purposely pivot to phone calls or finding just different ways to connect with people. So that's important. And I think I don't want to see social media spike through this, because we know that especially in younger people, can be linked to higher, you know, mental health issues. So
yeah,
I think too, what I was so inspired by, especially in Calgary, was seeing the businesses, how many, you know, the curbside concerts, Neil Zeller's portraits. I had a series of drag performances outside my door on my birthday in May. You know, those things, sending those things to your friends and talking about them, and, you know, sort of surprising coworkers or things like that. Like those aren't too expensive, and there's all these little things you can do. We all love getting mail, and this is part of that thing with the box for social at home. One of the things people love about it is we like getting boxes. We like getting mail, even though we don't do mail that much anymore. We like when something shows up. You know, something showed up at my door today and I was so excited because I didn't know what it was. And it was just a gift from a friend. And like, so doing those things, especially, you know, as it looks like we're gonna, whether we have to lock ourselves down kind of thing, you know, I think there's a lot of tension right now to being like, can I do this another 4 months? You know, and so it's up to us to make, you know, to check in, say with Kelsey and Jackie, you're saying check in and do things. And I would also say to businesses who are sort of like, oh, Neil did that and the drag performers and Matt did the concerts, try something. That's all everyone's done. Anyone that's found success in the last 8 months is because they just tried something. They didn't think about it too much. They just put it out there and they sort of let it navigate to see what people were interested in, things like that. The small businesses and nonprofits, we can tend to spin our wheels and we tend to take too long sometimes. And we're not afforded that anymore. So just try something and it's probably going to work, because if it's what made your first business successful, it's going to make this incarnation of your business even more successful.
yeah. We hate to think that a pandemic causes us to imagine what's potentially not impossible, but possible. And it takes these kinds of situations to spark that need for change, and hopefully to not be too afraid of the risks, right? Fail fast, but make some decisions. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, all of you.
Yeah, and to that end, I noticed Brian in the chat was saying now is a good time to both fail and innovate. You know, so at times like this, it's really important to try stuff. And you know, I don't think anybody can think negatively of people if they try stuff, even in a work context or a home context, to try and build that connection. So I'm also going to make a prompt for more questions. So we have one in the question box from Martine, which I'm going to ask in shortly. But you know, we want this to be as interactive a session as possible. So please populate that Q&A box and we'll be asking the questions of our panel. But so Martine has actually asked a question of Kelsey. So hi Kelsey, with regards to your comment around females displaying an enhanced level of empathy, I have a question. Knowing that everyone, including leaders, have access to sets of skills and abilities, why during such a challenging time are men still reluctant to tap into the empathy space? How can we successfully engage and encourage men to feel confident to foster that skill?
It's a really good question. And so, you know, it's interesting. I have worked with a leader for over 7 years that never believed that men and women are one way or the other. You know, we have feminine qualities, we have masculine qualities, and generally they show up in people in lots of different ways. And so although I'm a little bit hesitant to say that empathy is more of a women's skill. We tend to see that. However, to Martine's point, it's not to say that women can't or men can't build this skill. The tough thing about empathy is that it's really behavioral based. And behavioral change is really, really hard. So whenever we're engaging in behavioral change, we as leaders need to practice. So we need to practice something in real time. We can't just read about it in a book. And I think even when leaders are well-intentioned about developing and learning, it can be really hard and really vulnerable to try something. So I think it's really important to support people in that. So not only the education, but then saying, well, try something, and give your leaders some feedback around the ways that you might see that they're expressing empathy. I read a really good quote the other day from, it was about Yale in their institutional fund, mandating some gender equality and more diverse investments. And basically there was a line there that said, men of quality don't mind equality, which I really liked. So it was just, it's this perspective of, I think as we walk more into the future, we're going to see more openness towards learning and relying on more of those softer behavioral skills like empathy.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's
I
great.
jump in and totally agree with Kelsey. There's a great article in Greater Good magazine out of Berkeley that talks about how you practice empathy, from cultivating curiosity about strangers. So that doesn't mean grilling people, but being genuinely curious about people, trying another person's life. So really trying to empathize and be in that moment, listening hard and being open. And my favorite one they used, and I wrote it down, was developing an ambitious imagination. So empathize even with those you don't agree with or share the same beliefs. That is a powerful way to build your empathetic muscle.
Yeah, I would add that to Martine, the one that I always use by default is that empathy and the display of empathy in leaders is strongly correlated to performance. So to stronger performing companies, organizations, teams. And so when in doubt, always rely on, this is going to make us better and we're going to have greater performance as a team if we're all able to flex this muscle a little bit more strongly.
Cool. Good. Thank you for that. Another question actually in the chat from Hallie asking, I'm curious how you overcome decision-making fatigue this year. I've tried different iterations of my business and I'm tired out. What are your thoughts on how to keep going? Can I ask that one of Mike?
Yeah, and I wrote back to Hallie asking what business she had, just curious, but yeah. I fully empathize and fully understand. I said so many times this year, I'm so sick of making what feels like life or death decisions. Just everything I've done in the last few months has been so scary. And in a way, sometimes I realize it and sometimes I don't. And when I realize how scary it is, I really get myself freaked out. So she wrote back there, in education space with youth. So what sort of happened with me, and I wonder, like I've been an entrepreneur now for 7 years, and I basically wake up every morning not really knowing how I'm going to make money. I constantly have to come up with new ways of making money and things like that. And so maybe in a way I was prepared for this, not realizing it, but so I had social at home and the boxes were really successful. And so then my brain goes, well, what else can we use this box concept for? I've now figured out how, I figured out the companies, I figured out the supply chain of making sure these boxes can get delivered and things like that. And then that's where I came up with, I worked with TD this year and we did Pride in a Box, because I knew a lot of Pride fundraisers were going to be cut this year. And so we developed this box that was full of Pride stuff that you could decorate your whole house with. And then someone, we did a contest on Instagram, decorate your house, and gave prizes away. And now as I'm thinking about people quarantining and things like that, I've been brainstorming like quarantine in a box. And so if you know someone that's about to come back from a trip or someone that's about to go in the East Coast bubble or things like that, it's like a box full of stuff to amuse them for 14 days. And so I'm really, I mean, I left my full-time job to be a writer, and I've strayed so far from that. I'm now in the box shipping business, but so part of it is survival, but part of it is like, well, I still like the writing and the digital market, like the blogging stuff. Right now, this is really exciting to me, seeing where this goes. And so my advice to Hallie would be, and I fully understand that you've tried a bunch of things. I fully understand that you're exhausted. But find something, maybe there's been a little nugget that you found success with this year, and see how else you can pivot it. And then I would also say, if you haven't already, apply for every sort of grant out there. I know there's the small business loans. Like I took the $40,000 loan. I haven't touched it yet, but I know it helps me sleep every night, knowing that I have a little leeway should I need it. And the Alberta government has a $5,000 grant for small businesses that a ton of people don't know about. There's other things out there. So there's no shame in asking for financial help. There's no shame. One of the first things, sorry, this is a long answer. That's a good question. The other thing I did at the very beginning, I did the free webinars, and then I did, because people were very nice and saying, how can we help you? How can we help you? And I, not wanting to take just money from people. I created this 4-week webinar series, and I made it so cheap, and it was like $25. And I put on my personal Facebook, like, hey, like my business is hit super hard right now. If 100 of you buy tickets, I can pay my speakers. If 200 of you buy tickets, I can pay my mortgage this month. And people came up and stepped through. So offering something that's very sort of attainable for people to help you, whether it's a GoFundMe or something in exchange for a quick product, might be a way to give yourself some breathing room right now.
That's a great answer, and sort of great your own experience and great sort of anecdotes around that. So thank you. And it sort of leads me to another question that I've been thinking about, sort of resilience, how you build that resilience at times of change, and develop the muscles to kind of deal with extreme challenges and reduce in times of stress and challenge. So I wondered if, Jackie, any thoughts on that around sort of how you as an individual, or you've seen people around you develop those muscles to help deal with extreme challenges as we're experiencing?
I think it's pretty important for me personally to have a really strong social network that I can rely on and talk to, and be really open about sort of how you're feeling and the struggles and challenges you have. And then, I always think, I said it to someone today, I think my grandparents lived through 5 years of the Second World War. Yes, this is different, but that was such a long stretch of rationing, not being able to connect with your family or knowing what was happening, that this is really a small moment in time. So I keep, saying that to myself. It's a small moment in time. And I think, you do have to be flexible and try different things and not be afraid of failing. And we talked a bit about that earlier around innovation, but I think that's really important.
Yeah, and any other thoughts from Kelsey or Mike?
Yeah, but personally, in terms of how I've built resilience, I think we like, again, I've talked about Zoom fatigue, but we all, I think, experience that. And so right away, early on, I realized I needed to find a way to balance, break up my day and push on, certain events or calls and not get mired in webinars and conferences. I too have, Jackie, I think there's power in vulnerability. So being really open with your friends and saying it's a bad week, or, today I had a great day, and sharing why. I think there's a lot of power in getting really real with your friends. And then lastly, personally, I think Monique, you mentioned my daughter, and I have a 3-year-old, and I read this awesome quote the other day about how adults, like how we can learn so much from children. And through this pandemic, I've been amazed at their resilience, right? It's like they just go to school, they're all wearing masks, they don't bat an eye, and yet us adults are the ones complaining about all the regulations and the changes. So they're happy, and they find joy in small things, and they find ways to stay busy all the time. So their mind is preoccupied. And I think there's a lot we can learn about that.
I was talking to a friend a few weeks ago, and this might not apply to everyone, but we were talking about the work day and just trying to keep my business afloat and stuff like that. And he said to me, he goes, you know, just you don't have to work 8-12 hours a day. If your work day that day is only 4 hours, own it. It's 4 hours and call it. No point in sitting in front of your computer trying to find work, trying to come up with new ideas, whatever. Just say, hey, do you know what? I only have 4 hours of work today. I only have 3 hours of work today. And then go for a walk, watch TV, you know, and don't let yourself feel bad. We are going through a worldwide pandemic. It is not normal. It is not a reflection of your work ethic. It is not a reflection of your personal feelings about anything. It's happening to all of us, and just sort of really kind of own those, that what you need, and you don't owe anyone anything. So I've been trying to do that. You know, when I notice I'm just wasting time on the computer, I'm just like, well, this is stupid. I'm not working. I'm going to go do something else then, and maybe I'll come back and feel like working.
Some of the greatest ideas comes from those maker moments when you give yourself the space to not actually be in front of your devices. And in fact, some work that's being done by the CMHA, you know, really talks about how taking breaks is really important. And in those moments, you can have a phone call with someone instead of doing a Zoom call.
Yeah, I do that. I've been trying to do it, not always. I'm trying to get, you know, just saying, hey, I have to do this in like the 30 minutes, and I write it down. Just do 30 minutes. And I, in a way, I guess people would think I'm lazy, but I'm like, hey, I did that for 30 minutes. I'm going to go play with my cat for 10 minutes. I'm going to go have a coffee, kind of thing. But like, I'm finding my work personality, that's helping me feeling more accomplished than saying I sat in front of my computer for 8 straight hours, having checklists and just acknowledging what I actually have to do that day itself.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of checklists. Just looking at Q&As again. Again, I'm going to prompt people to keep filling up that Q&A box. V asks a question about measuring empathy. And I'm assuming this one goes to Jackie with the VR experience, about how are you measuring empathy?
So we are doing surveys for every participant in the experience, and also in addition some interviews that we'll be doing. I wish, and we'll figure out something longer term, because I noticed that Stanford in their VR experience has done a longitudinal study to see if empathetic feelings can last over time, and they have shown in their experience it has. So we may have to look at some additional measures in ours. It's not a one hit wonder. You do the experience and you leave and you don't feel empathetic. It has lasting impact on people. So we'll be curious to measure that part.
Cool. Good. And actually, Charles in the chat has also said, Jackie mentioned the need to build people's capacity to use technology effectively. It is our mission at Technology Helps. COVID has highlighted the importance of resources remain scarce. Who should be responsible for this? Government, community, social sector? Who pays? How do we make this happen? So build people's capacity to use technology effectively. Anyone want to weigh in on that? Does this become a broader responsibility than to society to be able to create that capability so people are able to connect virtually? Any thoughts?
That's a big one.
I know.
I'm just reading the question again because I want to make sure I understand.
I'd have to think a little bit more about it and reflect on it, but I think it should be everyone's responsibility. I mean, we see it happening in schools. We see the way kids learn and pick up technology so fast, particularly because they're in that period of life where they're just learning. They're absorbing so much, but that doesn't mean that that's the only generations that we should be educating tech on, right? And so I think there's a lot of great places where it's happening in the nonprofit side. I know Momentum in town, they do a lot of work in that area. I'm sure United Way does. So
yeah.
I think too, a year ago when we were watching a YouTube video or something, it had to look good. It had to sound good. It had to look beautiful. And this now we've been working like this for 8 months, and the quality is always different, the lighting's always different, and we've just sort of become used to it. I say, like, they filmed all of American Idol this year on iPhones. So like if they can do that with their $1 million budgets, I'm okay with a little grainy webcam video for things like that too. So I think in a way it's refreshed our idea of what technology has to look like and has to sound like. I think which is great. It means we can afford more affordable technology and things like that. So, and it's adjusted our expectations of what looking good and sound good actually means.
If you think about the topic of building human connections in a virtual world, and that there are so many people that don't have access to technology and therefore can't build those connections, I'm on the side of, I think it's a community societal responsibility. And if you look at communities like Estonia, countries that everyone is connected in some way, it really does change the lens of not only the human connections, but where poverty might sit or where mental health might fit in, and social isolation. And I don't know, Jackie, if you have any thoughts on that, given all the work that you're doing.
Well, I would totally agree with you, Monique. I think that it is something everyone in our community needs to have access to, whether it's internet access or access to technology. And I think we need to think about how we not only support that on the technical side, but how do we build people's skills to use it safely and effectively and in the right way possible, and how do we support that? And I know we've done some work in the Northeast, where we've had a group of IT volunteers go in and help members of the community set up their computer so they can actually talk to their family overseas. And this is pre-COVID. So how do we harness the power of what we have in our community? And we get people excited and feeling sympathy and empathy. And now how do we move them to compassion, which is really, I want to be able to help change that in our community. So I think that's our big challenge.
Right. I'm just looking at the chat because there's a couple of other questions. Mike asks one, which is, it's similar to this. How do we address the technology gaps that exist in our society so that we can ensure that we're including those who have extreme barriers? For example, many rural areas such as Indigenous reserves do not have the infrastructure in place for high-speed internet, and the telecom companies are not being incentivized to move more infrastructure there. What can we do in our organizations to provide them with access? That's a difficult question, and it's a technical question.
It's so important. I see there someone saying internet access is a human right, and of course it is. How we get there is, just having, doesn't sound very helpful, but maybe people don't even realize that the internet is a human right. So that basic conversation and showing people what people have and what people don't is a good place to start. But it's not something that's going to fix itself tomorrow.
I'm thinking about sort of basic rules of engagement. And I think we touched on that, just sort of pivot a little bit. So we touched on that earlier. Are there any sort of basic rules of engagement that you guys follow when you're speaking to people? What kind of things would you normally do, or habits have you established, or rules of engagement that you established in the last 9 months or so that help you interact effectively in the virtual world? Jackie, do you want to weigh in on that one?
So a couple things I always think about, and I do think about you and Monique, because I know you guys both practice them, but the idea of when you start a meeting, checking in with people, if it's a work meeting, and talking about something it's beyond work. It is sort of that human connection. How was your weekend, or what did you do? Or so I think that meaningful human connection at that check-in point is really important. I think, practicing as much as we can about what we do in person, online, eye contact, I have to say, sometimes I'm not always a fan of the chat feature on Teams and Zooms, because you're trying to listen to a conversation and people are adding comments, chatting. And so I know it has its benefits, but I like to think that as much as we can practice virtually what we do in real life to replicate some of that, it's important. And, how do you, have a water cooler chat? Do you text a colleague and say, can I chat with you for a sec, and do that quick question or that thing you would have chatted about in the hallway? I think looking for ways to do that, because that's where some of our innovation comes from, are really important.
Anyone else on that question about sort of basic rules of engagement?
I think for me, the one I've really been reflecting on actually, sorry, Jackie, to back up, I agree with everything Jackie said. I read an article in Wall Street Journal the other day that was from an executive at the furniture brand Herman Miller, and she was saying that what we're missing, what I think people are really craving, is that spontaneous interaction that comes from bumping into people. And that's just what we're not getting. And so we have to find ways to recreate that, whether it is just, spontaneously messaging someone, or just picking up the phone and dialing someone, which is a crazy thought, right? To think we did that 15 years ago. Not always scheduling things. I've also tried to be a little bit more vulnerable and show vulnerability to my team in the way that I approached kind of my workday and the structure of things. So I would be open and say, actually, hey, I'm on the spin bike right now, but happy to chat. Or, just going to run an errand, but let's jump on a call or whatever. So not always putting that facade just allows for, again, more spontaneity in the interactions. But the thing that I wanted to mention was just not, I felt a lot early on in the pandemic, the rhetoric was around, resilience, and we will get through this, and this will end, and we all just have to embrace the new future. And as someone personally who, change is hard for me, I think. So I reflected a lot on, okay, I need someone to just acknowledge my concerns and my fear around all of this right now, and just say, hey, it's okay. We don't know what's happening. We don't know where we're going to be in 1 year. And that's okay. And I just want you to know that I hear you and I recognize what you're saying. And so I think that is super powerful. And then we can move to, okay, well, now let's move forward.
Yeah.
I think there's that show on HBO called Girls, and I'm going to butcher it, but one of my favorite lines near the end of the series was her saying, I wish someone could tell me what I should do with my life, but make me think it was my idea. And that's sort of how I felt. Like, I was like, I wish someone would just tell me what I'm supposed to do this year, because I had a plan and that plan is all gone. I think for me, because the online conference is great and I really love it, but it also puts a lot more responsibility on the attendee and the speakers to make it a good event. There's only so much I can do, where if you were walking to a venue, I can make the venue look nice. I can make the sound look nice. I can make the lighting look nice. I do all those experiences. But at this point, now it's all up to the attendees and the speakers and things like that. So like for this one, we met 2 days before, we tested the lights, we tested the sound, and that's what you should be doing. We have to think more and more about our attendees, our customers, our clients, things like that, because the experience is not the same at all. But also, sort of what Kelsey's saying is that honesty. So like, I often refer back to, like, if I'm at a restaurant, remember restaurants, they were great. They used to be able to get food at them. Anyway, but if it was really busy and the waiter came by and said, hey, I'm really busy, I'll be here in 5 minutes, you're fine. You're like, whatever, no problem. But if the waiter ignores you, then you just get angry and angry and angrier, even though you can see they're busy, but you just want to feel acknowledged. So like with all my events, like we're just constantly being like, hey, we're doing our best. We have a text number set up so people can text us. We have all these ways that people can reach out to us just so they feel that they're being heard and listened to and things like that. And that's sort of what all of us need to be doing as we sort of get ready for whatever the next 6 months is going to look like, is realize that everyone is stressed, and what we can do is give everyone as much information as possible, but also hopefully they understand that we're going through the same thing they are, just in a different way, maybe.
Yeah, and in the chat, go on, sorry.
I would just add that the you, as a leader, we can't assume. So just as you're saying, Mike, like we have to acknowledge what we're doing and just be open and transparent with people. We can't make assumptions that people know or they understand. And that's a lot of how we've talked to a lot of the leaders we've worked with through the pandemic, which is have conviction, be open and honest with your team and be forthright. And if you're wrong 6 months from now and we said, hey, we're opening our offices in September and it didn't happen, that's fine. People aren't going to hold you accountable to the things that you got wrong. They're going to hold you accountable to, were you transparent and open with me or not?
And in the chat, Nicole has said, I love that, Kelsey. This is about an earlier comment about that. Drop the pretense. The whole thing has really leveled the playing field in terms of what we can handle and what we are handling. So that transparency, I think, from a leadership point of view, really comes out there. I'm going to ask one more question, and it's probably going to have to be quite quick answers. But we talked a little bit about that in the last answers. And we talked about, the new normal and what the future might look like. And I know the new normal was one of the most hated buzz phrases at the early start of the lockdown.
Especially for people who don't like change.
Yeah, exactly. But we've spent 9 months working this out. And when eventually, there's a vaccine and we're all going to be able to go back to work in our physical workspaces and go back to normal if we'd like, what do you think? How do you think we'll be living? Do you think we'll be adopting a lot of what we've learned in the last 9 months in the future, or do you think we'll just revert? Who wants to take that?
I'll just start. I mean, I hope the leaders are listening to what is working and what isn't. I've heard from friends who weren't allowed going, to work from their parents' house in Saskatchewan because the company was like, no, that means you're on vacation, you're out of Calgary, which is crazy. You're sitting in front of a computer anyway, to the complete opposite sort of thing. And so I've sort of said, like, I think it's going to be a really big time for co-working spaces. And I know downtown Calgary, it's going to be a big problem. But if your team has been successful in the last 9 months, I don't know why you would move everyone back, start paying those downtown rents again, things like that, when maybe your team was happier this way. But I think the human connection is important. I think they're running into people in the hallway or overhearing, oh wait, did you say this? No, I want to work on this. Like, that stuff's very important. So that's where, like, a co-working space, I think it's their time to shine. You rent a space, maybe you meet on Mondays and Friday mornings, and the rest of the time it's up to you, kind of thing. But I think the leaders need to listen to what their employees want, especially the employees that stayed with them through all of this and kept their company afloat, because I think it would be a shame if we went back to 9 to 5, 40 hours a week in the office, lunch hour. I noticed you were 5 minutes late for lunch. Like, I think that would be a mistake.
Kelsey or Jackie?
I would echo what Mike said. I think there's, I hope that we don't revert back and lose the trust that we've placed in people to manage their work and mash their work-life balance together. I think it'd be a shame to go back to that rigidness. I hope that we, big learning for me in this pandemic is, like, people are at different places and their comfortableness with interacting with others. And so I hope we maintain that kind of understanding or that empathy that everyone to people around that. So I hope we don't lose some of those kinds of things.
I think that's a great way to take us kind of to the end. Unless, Kelsey, you wanted to chime in.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the only thing I think about a little bit through this is, raising a child, bringing a child into the world where we don't hug, we don't touch, we don't communicate with strangers. That is concerning to me, like the things that she's learning. And so I hope that we hug again, and I hope we take down the barriers. And so I hope there's some things that we take forward, and I hope there's other things we just throw out the window and remember how important physical touch is for humans. Okay,
I love that. I don't even have a final word on top of that. So that'll take us to the end of this week's episode. We touched on a lot of topics, and stress and anxiety, and mental health in some ways. So if you're affected by any of the issues we've discussed today, we want to make sure that you know there is someone you can talk to. We have a list of resources here that are available, from 211 to the Health Link to the Distress Center, AHS, Help in Tough Times, and also the City of Calgary. United Way has support for individuals. And in addition to that, we have Natural Supports YYC, which is also about helping you with the skills that you need to support your peers and your friends and your youth and children in your life. So I want to have a very gracious thank you to our guests. We would like to continue engaging with anyone that joined us today through Open City. It's our open innovation platform. If you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, we are happy to continue the conversation there. And building human connections in a virtual world. This was only touching the top of it, and there's so much more that we could discuss. Just a reminder, today's session was recorded and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel, and we'll also be sending you the link in the next couple days. And a reminder that our next episode of Responsible Disruption is Equity in the Food System, which will be next Wednesday at 2 p.m. So thank you for joining us today. Be safe and stay healthy, everyone.